The clock had just struck midnight at my aunt's house, and the echoes of clinking glasses and shouts of Happy New Year still lingered in my mind as we drove home. It was a cold, clear night, the kind where the air feels sharp and crisp in your lungs. My parents were in the front seat, Mom flipping through a playlist, and my younger brother Luke sat beside me, half asleep, his face pressed against the window. We'd been at my aunt's for hours, celebrating with our extended family, but I was happy to finally be heading back. I was already thinking about curling up in bed when we pulled into the driveway. Our house sat dark, its windows reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights. That wasn't unusual. Mom always insisted we turn everything off before leaving, but something felt off. The front door was ajar. Dad was the first to notice. "Did you leave the door unlocked?" he asked Mom as he parked the car. "No, I locked it. I'm sure of it," she replied, her voice tight. We all got out, our breaths visible in the cold air. Luke tugged at my jacket, his eyes wide. "Maybe it's just the wind," he said, but his tone was more hopeful than convincing. Dad approached the door cautiously, pushing it open. The sight that greeted us stopped him in his tracks. Drawers were pulled open, papers and belongings strewn across the floor. The living room, once so tidy, looked like it had been hit by a tornado. "Everyone, stay back," Dad said, his voice low. "I'm calling the police." We huddled together on the porch as he dialed, the cold seeping into my bones. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that we weren't alone. Mom was holding Luke close, whispering reassurances, but her eyes kept darting toward the house. "Police are on their way," Dad said after hanging up. He glanced at us. "We're not going inside until they get here." We waited, the silence broken only by the occasional distant firework. But then, faintly, I heard something. A creak, like a floorboard shifting under weight. It came from inside the house. My heart sank. "Dad," I whispered, "I think someone's still in there." He froze, his face hardening. "Stay here," he said firmly, stepping toward the door. "No, don't." Mom started, but he was already inside, the light from his phone cutting through the darkness. The minutes stretched on agonizingly as we stood there, listening. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from inside, a thud, like something heavy falling, followed by a muffled shout. Dad came running back out, his face pale. "Get in the car! Now!" We didn't argue. Luke and I scrambled into the back seat as Mom started the car, her hands shaking. "What happened?" she demanded, as Dad climbed into the passenger seat. "There's someone in there," he said, his voice low. "I saw them in the hallway. They're hiding." The police arrived minutes later, their flashing lights painting the house in red and blue. We stayed in the car, watching as 2 officers approached the house with flashlights drawn. They disappeared inside, and for a moment, everything was quiet again. Then, a commotion erupted, shouting, the sound of footsteps, and finally, an officer emerging with a man in handcuffs. He was disheveled, wearing a black hoodie and jeans. But it wasn't just his appearance that chilled me. It was the way he smiled as they led him past our car, like he knew something we didn't. The police spent another hour searching the house and taking statements. They told us the man had broken in earlier in the evening, likely intending to rob the place while we were gone. But when he realized we were coming back, he decided to wait, hiding upstairs with a knife. My stomach turned at the thought of what could have happened if we'd gone inside. The officers praised Dad's quick thinking for keeping us outside, but the whole experience left me shaken. Even now, years later, I can't look at that house the same way. Every creak of the floorboards and shadow in the hallway makes me wonder what might be lurking. What could have happened if we'd been just a little less careful that night? I'll admit, the night started off pretty great. My friends and I had been invited to a New Year's Eve party by a friend of a friend. None of us knew the hosts personally, but it was in a swanky apartment downtown, and we thought, why not? The plan was simple: dress up, enjoy the free drinks, and celebrate the countdown to midnight in style. What could go wrong? We got to the party around 9 p.m., and it was packed. The music was loud, the atmosphere lively, and the drinks were flowing. My friends Emily and Vanessa and I were having a blast dancing, taking pictures, and mingling with strangers. Everyone seemed friendly, but one guy stood out: Greg. Greg wasn't exactly creepy at first. He introduced himself to me with an awkward but harmless compliment about my dress. I smiled politely and thanked him, thinking it was just another small interaction at a big party. But then Greg didn't leave. He lingered, asking me one question after another. What do I do? Where am I from? Who did I come with? I kept my answers vague, hoping he'd take the hint, but he didn't. Emily noticed and swooped in, asking me to come with her to grab another drink. I thought that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. Greg popped up again while we were on the dance floor, this time awkwardly swaying nearby, trying to join in. Every time I moved to another part of the room, Greg somehow found me. At one point, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're the most interesting person here." That's when I knew we needed to leave. It's not even midnight, Vanessa complained, as I explained the situation. But when Emily saw Greg hovering by the kitchen, watching us, she quickly agreed it was time to go. We left the party around 11 p.m. and headed toward the metro station. The streets were quieter than expected, with most people either inside at parties or waiting for the countdown. As we descended the stairs to the platform, I turned around and froze. Greg was there. "Is he following us?" Emily asked, her voice low. "I don't know. Maybe he's just going the same way," I whispered back, trying to convince myself more than anyone else. But when we boarded the train and Greg got on the same car, it was clear this wasn't a coincidence. He stood at the other end of the car, not looking directly at us, but clearly keeping us in his peripheral vision. Vanessa tried to keep things light, joking about having a stalker, but her shaky voice betrayed her fear. I clutched my phone, trying to figure out what to do. When our stop came, we got off in a hurry, hoping Greg would stay on the train. He didn't. The station was eerily quiet, and we were the only ones around. Greg followed us up the stairs and onto the empty street. "Let's go to the corner store," Emily suggested. "There'll be people there." We practically sprinted to the 24-hour bodega, the fluorescent lights and presence of the cashier offering a small sense of safety. But Greg stayed outside, pacing back and forth, occasionally glancing through the window. I texted my older brother, who was at a different New Year's party nearby, and told him what was happening. He said he'd come get us, but it would take at least 15 minutes. Greg eventually came into the store, pretending to browse, but his eyes were locked on me. Emily whispered to the cashier about what was going on, and he nodded, stepping out from behind the counter to stand closer to us. When Greg noticed, he muttered something under his breath and left the store. We didn't take any chances. The cashier let us stay inside until my brother arrived. When he showed up, Greg was nowhere to be seen. My brother walked us home, and though nothing else happened that night, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. To this day, I wonder what Greg's intentions were. Maybe he was harmless, but something about the way he watched us made my skin crawl. I've been more cautious ever since, especially around strangers. Sometimes, it's not about what people say. It's about the unsettling silence that follows them wherever they go. New Year's Eve in Times Square was always on my bucket list. It felt like the kind of thing you had to experience at least once, no matter how chaotic it might be. So, when my friends suggested we go, I jumped at the chance. We planned everything. Drove into the city early, found a spot where we could see the ball drop, and braved the freezing cold together. The energy in the square was electric, and for most of the night, I was having the time of my life. That was until the countdown to midnight got closer, and the crowd started surging. I don't know how it happened, but one second I was laughing with my friends, and the next, I was completely alone. The crush of people made it impossible to move, and any attempt to push my way back to where I thought my friends were just carried me farther into the madness. My phone was useless. Too many people in one place, all trying to post their selfies and live streams, had overloaded the networks. At first, I panicked. My friends didn't know where I was, and I had no way of contacting them. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I decided I wasn't going to let it ruin my night. It wasn't like I could find them in this sea of people anyway. So, I took a deep breath and let myself soak in the moment. The music, the lights, the sheer energy of Times Square. It was overwhelming, but in a weird way, it was kind of magical. When the ball dropped, I joined in the cheers, confetti raining down like snow. For a few minutes, I almost forgot I was alone. But then, the celebrations started winding down, and reality came crashing back. The crowd began to thin, and I pulled out my phone again to try and call my friends. Still no signal. I texted my dad, letting him know I was okay, but couldn't find my group. The streets around Times Square were packed with people heading home, and the noise was deafening. I couldn't hear myself think, let alone make a call. I decided to step down a side street to get away from the chaos, hoping the quieter area might help me get a signal. That's when I saw them. A group of guys lingering at the end of the alley. There were 4 of them, leaning against the brick wall, smoking and laughing loudly. As I walked past, one of them looked up and made eye contact with me. His smile wasn't friendly. "Hey, where you headed all alone?" he called out. I ignored him and kept walking, but I could hear their footsteps behind me. My heart started racing. "Don't be rude. We're just trying to talk," another voice said, closer this time. I didn't dare look back. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but the alley was long, and I was still far from the main street. My phone was in my hand, but I knew calling for help was pointless if I didn't have a signal. "Hey, don't walk away when someone's talking to you." The voice was sharp, and I could hear the anger in it now. I finally glanced over my shoulder and saw all 4 of them closing the distance. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a sprint. "Where are you running, sweetheart?" one of them yelled, laughter echoing down the alley. My breath came in gasps as I ran, my boots slipping on the icy pavement. I could hear their footsteps pounding behind me, and I didn't know if I'd make it to the end of the alley before they caught up. But just as I thought I was out of options, I saw headlights turn the corner. A police cruiser. I sprinted into the street, waving my arms and shouting. The officers hit the brakes and jumped out, their flashlights cutting through the dark. The guys who had been chasing me stopped in their tracks, hesitated for a moment, and then turned back, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. One of the officers ran up to me, asking if I was okay. I was shaking so hard I could barely get the words out. They stayed with me until I calmed down and managed to explain what had happened. One of them even let me use their radio to call my dad, who was able to reach my friends and arrange a place to meet up. By the time I got home that night, the excitement of Times Square felt like a distant memory. I had always thought of New Year's Eve as a time for celebration and joy, but now it would always carry a shadow for me. Even now, I can't think about that night without hearing the sound of those footsteps closing in. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. We hope you enjoyed these truly terrifying stories. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll know when we post new videos every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a scary story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.